God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Be seated. When you rehearse a play, the first day is mostly taken up with what's called the table read, which is exactly what it says. All the actors sit around a big table with the director and the stage manager and read the play aloud. The producers and the designers and the theater staff are all usually there to meet and greet and show support, but they're also there to get a taste of what this particular group of people is going to be bringing to this particular production as they rehearse it over the course of the next month or so. On this first day, there's a half hour or so of socializing, and then everybody sits down and the actors are at the table and they read the play straight through from start to finish. So the reading itself has a certain performance aspect to it, for better or worse. For a number of years, when I was starting out as an actor, probably over half the time at this table read, midway through it, I find myself looking at one of the other actors. It was always somebody that I didn't know or hadn't worked with before. And I'd be thinking, why in the world did they hire this guy? Just based on what I was hearing and seeing at the read. That's the basis on which I made the judgment. But within a couple of weeks, that feeling always went away, leaving just a slight sense of shame. Because I always came to see that what I thought was a wrong-headed approach to the character or a lack of talent was in fact just a different approach or a different kind of talent that I hadn't seen before or that I hadn't been able to recognize. So the problem was always mine. I should also say that after a couple of weeks of rehearsal, I was usually thinking, why in the world did they hire me? Why did I ever think I could do this? What each actor uniquely brings to the creation of a role affects everyone else's, all the other actors' understanding of what they themselves are doing, what they're doing in the play, and of the play itself. It's what gives life to the whole experience, what makes it new. That's the fun of rehearsal. That's the unknown. It's the unexpected, the new. That's the joy of creativity, and that's the juice of the production. And the whole point is that hopefully the audience will eventually share in that, because it'll be new to them too. Well, like a lot of what I've learned in the theater, what used to happen with me at that first reading, it's the same in the rest of life. Very often, when we encounter something that we're unfamiliar with, we see it not as new, but as wrong. So we reject it. This came up last Tuesday at our Lenten program. We have been looking every week at selections from Martin Smith's book of Lenten meditations called A Season of the Spirit. And this past Tuesday's reading was a section titled, I Can Live with Mystery and the Unknown, which Smith begins by saying that our instinctive response to the unknown is fear, rather than trust. We don't usually feel safe until we know what it is that we're encountering. It makes sense. But he goes on to talk about the problem this creates in human relationships, that it's fear of what we're unfamiliar with or what we don't understand in others that prevents us from being in community with them. Fear is what's usually at the root of why we reject or turn aside from relationships with other people, why we dismiss them, why we don't really hear them or see them. We don't give them a chance. So we keep them in the category of other. This fear is related to our desire to have things stay the same in life. That's not hard to understand. We want to live in a stable world, a safe world. We want to live in peace. We want our families and our communities to run smoothly. And we think that when things stay the same, that happens. So we try to do what we can to keep it that way. The problem with this is that things don't stay the same. Because God is always creating. God is never not creating. So when we want things to be the same, when we insist that they be the same, we often shut ourselves off from the new life that God is always offering us to join in and to grow in and to be enlivened by. The desire to keep things the same is a habit. It's a reflex which we need to keep ourselves aware of, because this doesn't just apply to marginalization of other people. It extends into all of life. The new life God creates has no limits. The passage that we heard from Isaiah today contains two of my favorite verses in the whole Bible, which speak directly to all of this. Do not remember the former things or consider the things of old. I am about to do a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? The book of Isaiah is addressed to the people of Israel living in exile in Babylonia. This exile for them meant much more than simply being forced to live in a different place. The land of Palestine had been given to them by God. It was part of the covenant with Abraham. And now, as far as they could see, that deal had been broken. And broken by God. So, who was God? Who were they? If they weren't God's people, they were lost. They'd been cut adrift. The passage that we heard today from chapter 43 is an oracle of salvation addressed to those people. And it begins with a reminder of how way back when God had delivered them out of Egypt. As we heard, the Lord makes a way in the sea, a path in the mighty waters. That's the parting of the Red Sea. Then comes the army of Pharaoh. The Lord brings out chariot and horse, army and warrior. And the same waters that in God's hands had been the miraculous means of the Israelites' deliverance, now in God's hands becomes the instrument of their salvation from those who would destroy them. Chariot and horse, army and warrior lie down. They cannot rise. They are extinguished, quenched like a wick. That's what the return of the sea does to them. So through the voice of Isaiah, God is saying, I have not abandoned you. This is the story of your people. This is your story, a story that is continuing even now. And this is the next part of that story, which we're about to start. Do not remember the former things. Do not consider the things of old. Those things I just reminded you about. That's what I'm asking you to do. Put the past behind you. Shake it off. Because if you don't, if you want things to stay the same, you won't be able to see what's about to happen. Because I'm about to do a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? I'm about to do a new thing. This is the point. God does not say to the Israelites, this is how I'm going to get you out of Babylonia and back home by doing this and this and this. We are to be ready for what God is about to do that we don't expect and that we won't see if we're only paying attention to what's gone before. And what God is about to do is another act of deliverance, just as great as the flight out of Egypt. And notice just how God is going to go about it. I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. In the flight out of Egypt, God had turned the sea into dry land. Now God does the very opposite. He turns dry land into rivers. So this time, instead of water that extinguishes life, quenches it like a wick, in the salvation of the people of Israel, now it's water that creates life. A river sustains life for the same purpose. It's the opposite of what had happened before. I'm about to do a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? You see, this is a three-stage process with a teaching in each. I'm about to do a new thing. This is God announcing the infinite possibility of God's creation. God can work through anything. There is no place in our lives that God cannot enter. No wound God cannot heal. Nothing broken that God cannot restore. So we are to be ready. Now it springs forth. It happens. God does do this. God does enter our lives. God keeps God's promises. What you never imagined you would see, here it is. So we are to trust God. Do you not perceive it? God turns to us. This is God's invitation to us to join in the new life that God creates. Next Sunday we begin Holy Week, which winds up in the most new thing since the creation of the world. This is what we should do. Be ready. Trust. Join. So let us prepare in the anticipation. Let us open ourselves to the truth on the day, and let us live in its light. Thanks be to God. Amen.